Today we're going to talk about yield and how it can be tricky to calculate, especially if you're using vegetable tan leather.
Am I in your shot?
You are. And then we're going to also go over theoretical versus actual yield and how that really impacts your pricing and how much you get out of a hide. So yield is basically the amount of leather, in this case, that you get out of each hide. It's usually expressed as a percent. So if you got 50% yield, it would be 50% useful product or useful raw material and 50% waste. If you got 75% yield, that means you're using 75% of the hide and 25% would be the waste amount. What do you think affects yield? Pay attention.
The quality of the hide, for
Okay.
sure. So like scars, fat lines, bug bites, things like that, or like sometimes the hide will have like the belly area can be really not the best portion of the hide. So whether or not you can use that in your design.
So as you know, a hide is not a perfect rectangle, so it's an irregular shape. So every hide's going to be different, which is, can be really confusing and feel complex when you're trying to figure this out. Like Leanne said, there's bug bites, there's scars, there's branding, there's the clip marks that the tannery uses when they're stretching the hide. There's a lot of things that can affect what yield you get out of each hide you purchase.
Oh, and the shape of your pattern.
And the shape of your pattern, that's a big one.
And how they fit together like a puzzle piece.
If you're fancy, you can use a projector and project your patterns onto your hide to know you're getting the best fit possible. There's also programs that have an algorithm that nest your pattern pieces in for you, but that's like professional level.
It's like super fancy. You got a
That's not what we're going to talk
cutting
about.
Machine.
Yes. First, let's visualize what a square foot of leather even is. It's this. Typically, from a U.S. tannery, you're getting about 24 square feet of leather from a hide. And if you're choosing Italian vegetable tan leather, you're probably getting from 10 to 14 square feet. So that's a square foot.
It's like a square foot to me.
Which is 12 inches by 12 inches. That'll be important later. Let's go over the first mistake and the most common mistake made when trying to calculate your yield. So like I said, we're gonna use the number 24 square feet as a reference, and that'll be part of everything we talk about today. So a lot of people will take that 24 square feet, they'll calculate the area of their pattern, which is their length times their width of their pattern, and they'll just divide that into the 24 square feet. So that when you do that, you're assuming 100% yield and 0% waste. So anyone that works in leather knows that's just not how it works. That's not how it. But people tend to calculate that way because that's a really simple way to calculate the theoretical yield you should get from your pattern. If you were going to guess, how many of these would you get out of 24 square feet? Do we have Jeopardy music?
So if you had 24 of these squares.
24 square feet, how many of these would you get? It's your time to guess. The answer is really going to surprise you. So this is 6 by 3 3/4, which is 22.5 square inches. So if you guessed 153, you'd be right. And that is the theoretical amount of this card holder you could get out of 24 square feet if it was a perfect rectangle. Let's show you why that's wrong. First, let's talk about how we got the theoretical number first. Since this is 6 times 3.75, you multiply those together and you get the area, which is 22.5 square inches. And then, to get the square feet, you need to divide that by 144. That's how you get 0.15625. And you get 144 because 12 times 12 inches is 1 square foot. So this measured in square foot is 0.15625. And then you basically just divide 24 square feet with this, and you get 153. So what I ended up doing is I laid out as many of these card holders as I could get into a 24 square foot hide, accounting for scars and blemishes and how I would actually cut it out. You don't want to just jam them all in there. If you jammed all these in there, that's not what actually happens in reality, right? You wouldn't sell a piece with deep scars in it. You wouldn't sell a piece with a hole in it. You have to get the actual results so that you can use that number for your prices, for yield, for purchasing leather amounts, all those kinds of things. Now we can guess how many of these we actually got out of a 24 square foot hide. Any guesses? Build for this is 80 card holders. That's significantly less. And you'll notice I didn't use a lot of the belly because it has a looser grain. That's not something I would sell in this product. There's some scars and blemishes all throughout. And then there's some deeper fat lines on the corner over here, which we wouldn't use for a product either. So my 80 card holders multiplied by the square footage of this would be only 12.5 square feet of leather used. So that's only 52% yield, which means there's 48% waste in this hide here. And I think it's important to get the visual of it because I would have assumed this was at least 65%. And that's a pretty big difference, especially when considering pricing. So let's make another assumption. We're going to say this hide costs about $300. So if you take $300 that you've paid for your hide and divide it by the theoretical amount of 153, you would think that you're going to get just a little bit under $2 each for each card holder in leather material cost. That's just the cost of material, and not to be confused with a cost you would charge somebody at a wholesale price. So that would be, to be exact, that would be $1.96 each theoretically out of there. But if you're using the 80, the actual, it's about $3.75 for each card holder in leather material cost. So ways you can increase your yield, say you get 80 card holders out of this, maybe you can make bookmarks or keychains out of some of the smaller pieces, which can increase the yield you get per hide. So it's important to really utilize as much as you possibly can. And you can see this is mostly a rectangular design, but the more circular or natural curves that you have in your design, the less yield you'll get per hide. It's just more difficult to lay it on there, and it's just, you got to work with what you have. Some have scars on them, some hides have imperfections that just don't allow you to use it in the best way. So you have to, put your thinking cap on, and even putting out all of your patterns on the hide first before you cut will help you get the best yield you can. So I would say this is a pretty average hide. So if I were you, I would probably try to calculate this per design, like once a quarter, so that you know that you're still in the ballpark of where you need to be every time you're making those designs. If I had a hide that was especially clean, or a hide that was especially marked up, I would consider that and try to figure out the average between those two so that I have a good idea of how much my leather is really costing me per design. And like I said earlier, you want to get the best yield you can. And I think to do that, you don't want to just jam as much as you possibly can in there. You want to get some real numbers to give yourself a little bit of a buffer against, the occasional bad hide. And you can see you get quite a bit. You get 80 card holders. But if you're making a bag, you would definitely not get 80 bags out of a hide. This is why I think averages are important. So if I can look at a hide and go, well, for a certain design, this gets me 3 bags, or for another design, maybe this only gets me 2. So I know if it's 2 bags, that's $150 in leather cost, or I can just divide it by 3 or 4 or 5, or however many bags that I average out of each hide to get like a really good ballpark number on how to estimate my leather costs per design. All right, so let's think about card holders again. So if my card holder cost me $3.75 in leather material, that sounds cheap, doesn't it? But that's not the only thing that goes into making a card holder. Obviously, the material, right? You spent $300 on your material, and then you have your thread, you have your time and your labor, which you need to account for. You have any kind of overhead, rent, if you're paying other people. There's all sorts of things that go into it. It's not just the raw material cost. If that were the case, this would be a heck of a lot more simple. It'd be the easiest thing to do. So let's go over a couple numbers. So like I said, $375 in leather costs for this, but you need to be able to repurchase material for your next card holder. So you basically need to double that. So that brings us to $750. And if you know you want to pay yourself $25 an hour, and you can make 5 of these an hour from cutting, stamping, burnishing, sewing, all the things, takes 5 per hour. That gets us a $5 cost in labor per card holder, which brings us to $12.50. So that being said, you have to figure out how you're going to sell your stuff. That won't include any kind of advertising budget. That won't include any kind of profit yet. That won't include any kind of wholesale or like retail markup. So that's just like a good basic starting point. Let's make it real simple and say, all said and done, another $5 will get you your overhead costs or anything else for your business, bringing us to what? $17.50. And we'll say you want to make about $13 per card holder, which brings us to an even $30 all in. So you can really see how that $3.75 card holder really changes as you start to add your operational expenses into it. If you're working in retail, you'll also need to figure out those percentages. And also you have to see what the market is interested in bearing for that item. This is a fairly simple card holder, so you might, I've seen these for $60, $70 even, so that makes sense to me at retail. So you can figure out where you fit in the market, how you finish your edges, what kind of material you use, and all that kind of stuff. So let's do a quick rundown of a basic bag. So let's say your hide costs you $300. You can get 4 of your designs out of it. So your leather costs you $75 per design. It takes you 4 hours to produce that bag, start to finish. At $25 an hour, that's $100. So that brings us to leather cost is $75. You need to repurchase it, so $150. Adding $100 cost in labor is $250. So your overhead might be like $15, bringing us to $265. And then you add profit of $35 per bag, plus shipping, boxes, and cards, which is another $20. And that brings you all the way to $320 pretty quickly. Now you can see everyone's situation is going to be different. Your rent's going to be different. All your overhead, all your costs are going to be different. How long it takes you to produce is going to be different. So if that same design took you 8 hours, that's an extra $100 to that. So that would be $420 for that design. So you can see how the speed and your efficiency is really going to help you in your pricing. Okay, so you get your 80 card holders and you're able to squeeze out about almost 5 more square feet of small goods from your hide. So then you can start to calculate what your actual yield's going to be as your total project cost. So you have your 24 square feet. You're able to use about 17 feet, just under 17 feet of it, 16.8. And that gets you to like a 70% yield, 30% waste. And if that's what you end up averaging, now you have a good number to apply across all your products. If you want to get extra fancy, you can have all of your bags in a spreadsheet with their square footage, so you can figure out how many sides you would need to produce, whatever you've sold. Hopefully I didn't confuse you, but if you feel like I got something wrong, please let me know in the comments. Yield, I feel like feels a lot like math, but it's more like an art. You're trying to figure out how to get the most out of each hide you have. And that can be really tricky, especially when you're selling different kinds of goods, different patterns. But once you start getting used to estimating it as an average item per hide for what you make, I think that's when it starts to get a little bit easier. So in this case, I think it's better to underproject your yield percent. That way you know you're getting the profit that you set out at the beginning. This also shows you that if you're not utilizing your hides with some small goods, that you're only really going to be getting like 55% yield on a hide. And that's probably not good enough for most people trying to make this their living. If you found this helpful, please consider subscribing to our channel, or give us ideas on what you'd like to see next. What do you got? Did you have any other questions?
No.
No. Ah.